that's difficult for me. I understand it. I'm not suggesting that we don't hold people accountable, and but I don't know. I think I probably need another 10 or 15 years to figure that stuff out. So.
Okay. Practically, when you were taking part in the interrogation, you were translating the questions or you were leading the interrogation?
I did a combination. Some interrogations, it really depended on subject matter. Some I could handle on my own. Others I did use a translator. It also had to do with who I was interrogating. The less educated, sort of like the farmers or the younger guys, I had a harder time understanding. Their Arabic they used an Iraqi dialect. Guys who were more educated, who had maybe spent time at university and spoke more of, or at least a combination of what would have been called MSA, Modern Standard Arabic, that was easier for me. So it depended on subject matter and the individual. So
okay. So let's go back when you came. When did you return home? And was that your decision, or?
I went. I was pulled back to Baghdad. They were still creating new teams, and there was a new team being created in Baghdad that was going to have a new purpose. It was called the counterintelligence team. We were essentially going to work with
what was it called?
Counterintelligence, and so the idea, this is when Camp Victory was now up and running. And a lot of Iraqi workers were coming onto the base and doing odd jobs, cleaning the bathrooms, painting the buildings, that sort of thing. And so they'd file up in the mornings outside the gate, and we would walk these lines and get to know these guys, go out into the local community, figure out who was in charge. I mean, it was a system where certain men of influence were getting the jobs on the base, and then they were getting their guys. Like anything, it was based on who you knew. And so we wanted to know the guys that were influential. And so they wanted people who spoke the language. That was the key. And so I got pulled back to Baghdad to do that job. I did that for a few weeks. There was an incident where I was already stressed from Fallujah, and there was an incident that took place that stressed me out a little bit more. And I think I recognized in late May, I was also having trouble with the employer, paychecks, logistics, those sorts of things. New contractors were popping up, better ones. And it was, we talked to people, and it looked like if we went home, there was another company we could work for and then come back. And so in May of 2004, I quit and came back home with the intention of going back.
So May 2004, you went back.
Mm-hmm.
Since you touched it, I think I've read it somewhere, but your paycheck was around which kind of money?
The annual salary was $120,000 a year. We were paid like any other job, bi-weekly. It was tax-free if you were out of the country for 40-some weeks. There was a number you needed to make. I didn't make that number. I came home having made, I think, about $40,000, and I had to pay, because I didn't stay long enough, I had to pay about $15,000 in taxes. So I made some money, but I was not a wealthy man.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. It didn't really change your life. I mean, it's not something that you do once in your...
I mean, I was well compensated. I was not, we weren't poor, but...
Yeah. But compared to a military paycheck, is that much bigger?
It is, but there's some nuance. There's some nuance to that. I'd done 5 years in the Army. I had a very specific skill set that the Army needed. They paid $120,000. Someone with my experience in the Army deployed to Iraq probably would have made in the neighborhood of $60,000 to $70,000. Yeah. The difference is when I came home, there were no veterans benefits. There was no education. There was no medical. I came home. I turned in my gear. That was it. I was on my own. When a soldier comes home, they're typically on for another year, so that you need to pay them for another year. And then you pay their very generous education benefits. I can't go to the VA for any kind of medical or anything, so I get the argument that we were overpaid, but it's not that simple. The government saved a lot of money by using contractors. The government, we all make jokes about how inefficient they are, but they're not necessarily stupid. And so one of the ways to fight the war on the cheap, and I know it sounds counterintuitive, was to use contractors. You save a boatload of money by fighting wars with contractors.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so you came back, and how was it? I mean, after all of this stress and these pictures in your eyes and your memories and...
First, well, I came back, I flew into Fort Bliss, Texas, and I turned in my gear. We were living in Pennsylvania, and I had the opportunity to get on a flight and be home that afternoon. That would have been about a 3-day turnover. So I would have left Baghdad. I don't remember the days of the week, but let's say I would have left Baghdad on a Monday. I could have been home in Pennsylvania Wednesday afternoon, and I wasn't prepared to do that. I was going home to my wife, and it was too fast. It was, here I am, Baghdad, now I couldn't do it. So I got to Texas, and I called up my wife, and I said, yeah, I'm going to take a train. I'm going to hop on a train. It's going to take 3 or 4 days, and I'm just going to... And she was not happy. I mean, she obviously wanted me home, but that was my only way to sort of get a buffer. And so I hopped on a train, and I rode it cross country, and I got home, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 days after that, so later in the week. But even then, it was too quick. And there are certain moments in your life, some things are fuzzy, but other memories are crystal clear. And I can remember like it was 2 minutes ago, pulling up to the house, walking inside, what the greeting was, walking up the steps, what sheets were on the bed. It was this horrendously foreign environment. Even though it was home, everything was wrong, and it was very hard to adjust to that. And that went on for 3 or 4 days, where I didn't feel like I was home yet. And that being said, nightmares didn't start right away. I had had a few in Iraq, minor ones, and I may have had 1 or 2, but it wasn't anything out of the ordinary. I mean, you have nightmares anyway, so it didn't seem. But within 2 or 3 weeks, they became pretty intense and pretty frequent, nightly type things. And it got to the point where I'd be afraid to go to sleep, because you knew it was sort of, like a little kid watches a horror movie and shields his eyes, so a scary part comes up and you shield your eyes, or you change the channel or whatever. But you couldn't do that with a dream. So you felt like when you went to sleep, you were sort of going to be forced to experience this stuff, and there was no way to turn it off, no way to avoid it. And I started to self-medicate with alcohol, so that started pretty quick. You could sort of dull it. I wasn't a stumbling drunk. I was a functional drunk essentially, so I was okay during the day. But at night, I just needed things dulled, and that was the only way I knew how to do it. So.
Which was completely new to you, but before going to deploy to Iraq, you didn't.
No, I mean I'd drunk. I'd have a beer, but yeah, I'd never.
Everyone.
I knew what I was doing. I was using it as a tool. So.
And your wife, how did she react to the new you? I mean.
Well, it was hard. Neither of us knew.
So many nightmares, so many weight on.
Yeah, neither of us knew how to. I mean, it wasn't. There was no way. There was no handbook. We weren't. And I think the other thing that hurt us was we were not in any kind of community at that point that shared any of those experiences. So often, you get home with your unit on a base, and sort of everyone's going through that. this was different. Here I was in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. There was no one around who knew anything about this stuff. The guys I had gone with were either still there or off to other jobs in other parts of the country. So it was, we were isolated. Both of us were isolated because now at this point she's carrying, a similar burden, which was me. So the answer to that was to go back, and I did in 2005. There was a, well, actually in 2004, there was a contractor, my friend Ferdinand, who I'd been with in Fallujah. He had come home and he had gotten another job with Dynacor, which was a security company, and he was going to bring me in on his team. I was going to go back with him. He went back over. I ended up taking a job with the U.S. government as an actual government employee, and I knew that within about 6 months they would send me back over. And so Ferdinand and I talked, and I weighed which to do, and I wasn't sure. And within a month he was killed in Baghdad, as many contractors are. The numbers are pretty high, and so that obviously was the end of my connection. I went back to Iraq in 2005, summer of 2005, for a few months, doing something not involved with interrogation. Got home in the early fall of 2005, and then quit the government at that point, and that was enough. I'd had enough at that point. I was an Arabic linguist. I had Iraq experience, which meant I was going to get more Iraq experience. I was a valuable commodity. Could have written my own ticket at that point, but I'd had enough. And Karen, or Sarah, whatever you want to call her, had enough too at that point. She had a good job offer back in Pennsylvania. I was looking at seminary at that point, and so I gave my 2 weeks' notice, and we moved back to PA. And my hope at that point was to bury it and be done with it.
This is, from outside, it's hard to believe that after you have already experienced the backlash of your experiences, meaning the nightmares, you choose as a cure to go back once again in Iraq.
I think the vast majority of guys who have been there would go back and want to go back. I'd like to go back, we've had this discussion amongst friends. You get over there and it stimulates your senses in a way that they've never been stimulated before. It's exciting. It's scary. You get angry. It's just. You see, there's a certain clarity about things. You have a purpose, and it's at such a high level that you can never get back to it. There's nothing you can ever do to equal that kind of, for lack of a better term, adrenaline rush.
Yeah, it reminds me of drugs in a way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm not very familiar, but it's like the craving of. Once you've experienced the kind of like cocaine, the kind of high, only war can give you the same.
Yeah, when I was a police officer, we had Philadelphia is the heroin capital of the United States, and so there was where I was up in Allentown, Bethlehem. There was a drug highway up through that area, and it was heroin that was coming through, and heroin. If there's a demon in the world, it's heroin. The things that it does to people are kind of unspeakable, to the point, and they all say the same thing, which is the first time they try it, it's the greatest thing they've ever experienced, and then they spend the rest of their life trying to catch that original high, and they never do. And there were people that I met that were doing 4 or 5 or 6 bags a day just to function, not to get high. Just to be able to get up and walk, and it was that sort of crushing and addictive. And I'm not suggesting that war is on that plane, but there's some sort of similarity there. That there's nothing I can go out and do that would equal that kind of experience. So.
Okay, very tough. Yeah. Okay, so now. For 2005, you've done with it. You quit the military. any form or contractor?
Yeah. 05, right.
05.
Gone.
And then what happened?
We moved back to Pennsylvania. I'd been accepted to Princeton Seminary at that point. This was now 06. And summer of 06, I think, is when I first started writing op-eds to the local newspaper, not about interrogation, just about war in general. And at this point, I had sort of turned, as many people had turned, into opposition against the war in Iraq. And so I spoke about some of those things, small-time op-eds, a small newspaper. And I recognized that as I started to write, both journaling but also doing the op-ed writing, that I was ignoring the big issue, the elephant in the room, which was the interrogation experience. And so I sat down one day and I wrote what became the Washington Post piece. This was early fall of 06. And I wrote it within, 15 or 20 minutes. And so op-eds take a long time for me to write, a couple of days. This one, the second I sat down to write it, it came out. That original version had some minor edits and minor changes, but what appeared in the Post was essentially what was written in late 06. I didn't have the nerve to send it right away because I knew at that point what I was getting myself into. Karen and I had discussions. We talked about the possibility of prison, and some of that stuff seems kind of ridiculous now, but at the time it seemed like a possibility. America was a different place in 06. So I didn't send it. I wrote a few more articles. My conscience gnawed at me, and then I sent it out in, I think December of 06. I sent it to the Post. And they accepted it immediately. Then some weird things happened. They had a changeover in editors, and so it sort of got lost in the shuffle at one point, and they rediscovered it, and they had it, and they wanted to schedule when it was going to print, and so they said, we want to get it in the Sunday section because that's our biggest reading, so we have an opening in 3 weeks, and I said that was fine. And about a week later, I said, I changed my mind, that I'd waited too long, and I pulled it out, I pulled it back. And I said, I'm not going to. And I said, all right, get back to us. The conscience continued to gnaw at me. And so I got back in touch with them and said I had changed my mind. They printed it the next day. So there was no Sunday. It was, I think it appeared on a Wednesday or a Thursday. I don't remember. But once they got their hands back on it, they put it in, and that was sort of the beginning of all of this.
Yeah. So you start to get emails, you start to have comments on the...
Well, I printed my email address at the end of the piece.
Yeah. Why did you do that?
I don't know.
And to entice people to...
Well, I didn't anticipate...
to expiate in a way, I don't know.
I think I wanted a discussion. I wanted there to be some kind of discussion about not only what I was writing, but what had happened. And I thought that would be an avenue. I did not anticipate the kind of feedback that was coming. I thought, 50 emails, something like that, over the course of a week or two. There was no way to know. Karen and I, so it published at 12:01 a.m. They changed over the online site. And so Karen and I were sort of goofing around that night and watching it publish. And within 10 or 15 minutes, you could refresh your inbox and 10 new emails, 20 new emails, 15 new emails, 100 new, and over the course of the next hour or two, I was up to 400 or 500. By the next day, it was over 1,000, and that was some of the stuff that eventually appeared in the plowshares. That was the kind of stuff that was coming in. Not all. There were a lot of supportive emails too, but.
And how did you feel?
I was scared. I think there was regret that I had published the piece, but I think there was also some fear involved that I had drawn that much attention to myself. And I know that sounds strange. Well, you're an idiot. You published a piece on what do you expect? But it was new to me. There was no way to know that it would have that kind of impact on people. or that people would be so angry about it. And in retrospect, I would not have published my email. And you know, when I published this Plowshares piece, I was very intentional about hiding. So my email was very difficult to find. I had shut down my Facebook account. I'm not listed in the phone book. You know, I went the opposite direction. But for that, I wasn't aware, and I wasn't ready.
I mean, because from what someone wrote in the comments, I mean, it's full of lunatics that could even pass to action.
Yeah, I mean, and I say I at this point. At this point, it was we, because Karen was involved in this whole process. I knew I was poking. I knew who I was poking. So it's also why I picked the Washington Post. I mean, in some ways, maybe I sound naive about not knowing the response. I knew very well what I was doing in terms of the legal ramifications, my employment obligations. I knew I was violating my work contract. I knew all that, and we just.
Please explain me better. You say you were.
Well, you sign a non-disclosure agreement, and so it may be a gray area, and lawyers would fight about it. But technically, I was violating that non-disclosure agreement because I was talking about my employer and was criticizing them in open press. So they called very quickly, the legal department. I had no discussions with them. So.
At the legal department of the contractor.
Yeah.
But then they didn't go through. I mean, they didn't.
No, I mean there wasn't much they could do, and now we get into sort of policy discussions in the bigger picture. Nothing I had written about in the Washington Post was illegal. There wasn't, again, morally wrong maybe, but at that point, not illegal. And I didn't disclose any classified information. I was very intentional not to do that. That was not what I wanted to do, but I did want to start having an open discussion about whether or not this stuff should be going on.
But when you said you talked with your wife about the possible consequences and also jail time, I mean,
it seemed unlikely, but it was hard not to think of it as a possibility. I mean, it was we had seen what they had done to Grainer in England, and and all the others, and it wasn't as if I was some kind of whistleblower saying, "Here's what I saw," or "Here's what I heard," or "Here's what I did," and so in that sense, I was drawing attention on myself.
It was brave, no doubt.
Well, I don't know that it was brave, but I felt that there was no other way. There's no other way to do it. I don't think you can. And this is what we talked about earlier. I can't judge what other people were doing. I can think about whether it was right or wrong, but they have to make that decision for themselves about whether they were in the right or in the wrong.
Okay, we are getting closer to the end. How did this change your life, your relationship with your friends, with your loved ones? I mean, how did it change?
That's still
when you came public.
Yeah. Well, the immediate effect was I essentially lost contact with just about everybody I had served with. I suspect that there was there was an understanding amongst even I understood that once I did this, that those relationships would end. Those guys were still in the business. They had jobs. They had families to support. Clearly, you can't be out there writing those sorts of things and expressing that kind of stuff and expect to be employed by the U.S. government, or the contractors. So yeah, those relationships ended for me. So I essentially became disconnected from what otherwise would have been my support groups. Some friends understood what I was saying, and when I say friends, I mean people that I had known before the war, either through home or college, or others disagreed. But it wasn't something we talked about at dinners or hanging out. It just wasn't. I mean, and this became the problem with Iraq in general. It just wasn't something people wanted to talk about or didn't know how to talk about.
But if you should do any percentage, I mean, you still have a core of friends, or this coming out in a way jeopardized really all of your friends or most of your friends?
It jeopardized my military connections. So the guys I had served with. And some maybe just because they disagreed with me, but others because they saw it as being too risky because of the business they were in. But again, this was part of the problem of the way that we, a very small military in the United States, in a very large country, you're isolated. So even if you have friends who you served with, they may be living in Oregon or in Texas or in Florida, thousands of miles away. You can make a phone call, but it doesn't. Friendships are based on fellowship and hanging out and spending time, and you can't do that in an isolated community. So my friends became the people I was with, which eventually was seminary, and there weren't people at Princeton Seminary who had any kind of experience in Iraq or with the military or anything like that. So I lived two lives. I lived this life that was involved with the media and newspapers and radio programs, which was when I talked about Iraq, and then I lived this other life, which was Princeton Seminary, when we talked about theology, or we played frisbee, or we talked about the restaurant in Princeton that we liked, and so it was two completely different worlds.
And this award, the seminar award, did you know about the Iraq, or did you know?
The administration knew, yeah. So I made them aware of what I had done, but. The students did not. I grew close to a few, and I explained the things that were happening. And one in particular I became very close friends with, and he was very interested in hearing and trying to understand, and he and I have stayed in touch since and become very close friends. But again, in general, and it wasn't just the seminary, but I think it was society. I think it was a societal problem. There just wasn't a way to have the discussion about what had gone on over there in an everyday setting. I could go up and stand in front of a group of people, and my name would be up on a board, Arab Fair, Iraq, Abu Ghraib, and now I can talk about it.
Society of psychoanalysts in Boston.
Yeah. And so people would want to come hear that and say, "Oh, what a great presentation," or want to have, but you didn't go home and talk about it. It was two completely different worlds.
Let's talk a little bit more about your choice of joining the seminar. I mean, you have done it also without Iraq?
I think so.
Either you are upbringing, you affected, you come from a family of Presbyterian.
Yeah, seminary had been something I considered. Now we go back to high school. I mean, it had been in the back of my mind. My great-grandfather was a Presbyterian minister. I have his old lectern. So I grew up in the Presbyterian church. So that was always there. In truth, I think, people say, "Oh, well, Iraq led him to seminary." I don't think that's true. I dropped out of seminary. I think without Iraq, I likely may have finished seminary. Now, one of the problems for me was I was living these two different worlds, this sort of Iraq media, Washington Post, and the seminary world, and I spent too much time concentrating on the writing and the speaking, and I wasn't able to focus on seminary, which needed my sort of undivided attention, and I couldn't do that. And so after a year, I knew that I wasn't investing the kind of time I needed to, and I dropped out.
So seminary lasted 1 year.
1 year. Yeah.
And after and the last which year was that?
07 to 08.
Okay.
So I started in the fall of 07 and I left in 08.
And after that?
After that, we moved back to Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Karen went back to work, and I started to get sick, and that was when the heart caught up to me. For whatever reason, just time. For a couple of weeks, I started to have the sensation I couldn't breathe and I couldn't function, and now I have a son at this point. I couldn't keep up with him. I ended up catching some kind of cold or the flu, and it put me in the hospital to the point where I couldn't breathe. They stuck a catheter in my neck. They did some tests, and my heart function was essentially about as low as it can be at that point. So it was. I ended up in the hospital in Philadelphia in the ICU for a few weeks, and I got the "Put Your Affairs in Order" speech. It was. They were talking maybe a year if I was lucky. They put me on the heart transplant list. They put me on all sorts of medicines. The medicines essentially lower my blood. I don't have high blood pressure, but the medicines that treat my heart condition do lower blood pressure. So my blood pressure was so low that I couldn't function. I slept 22 hours a day. So that ended everything. That ended writing. That ended seminary. I was in bed. The medicines eventually took effect. I stabilized. I'm still on the heart transplant list, and that chapter is yet to be written. So we'll see where that goes.
How many hours did you say you were sleeping?
At least 20 a day. I'd wake up in the morning, say hello, go lie on the couch, and go back to sleep. It was I couldn't.
And at the time you had a just born baby.
He was 2 at that point. So we were near family. I mean, family and friends stepped up and helped take control. So
it seems like your body, after you've done all of these things, the way you imploded.
It was a matter of time, according to the doctors. I mean, I had beaten the odds up to that point anyway. My original function when the heart was discovered, when the heart problem was discovered in 2002, was already very low, and they were surprised that I was able to function at all. There's something called an ejection fraction. Ejection fraction. It's a common term amongst cardiologists. So your heart pumps. When your heart contracts, it ejects blood into your system. A healthy ejection fraction is about 60%. So when your heart contracts, it's shooting about 60% of what's in the heart into your veins. My ejection fraction in 2002 was about 30%. So that was considered heart failure. By 2009, when things really went downhill, my ejection fraction was about 5 or 10%. So the heart walls had hardened. So instead of being flexible, they were just sort of barely moving, and I wasn't getting any blood into my lungs, and I was having. So that was that. Yeah.
And that's when they put the defibrillator?
Yeah, they'd wanted to put that in years ago, but I finally agreed to have that implanted. And that doesn't do anything unless something goes wrong. But
it's not a very good friend of mine, but
right.
Defibrillator, so I know how it works.
But the medicines have essentially stabilized me.
Yeah, because the defibrillator doesn't solve the problem of these.
No, the defibrillator is inert, so it just sits there waiting. The medicines have stabilized me.
So now with this medicine, you work fine.
I'm stable.
Yeah.
I'm not who I used to be. I can walk 15, 20 blocks, which I'm very lucky. But I can't run. I can't run anymore or do any of those kind of things. So.
Okay. And may I ask you, how do you support yourself now?
My wife supports me, so she has a good job. We're very lucky in this economy. She's a chemical engineer.
Wow,
so,
great.
She's a smart woman. And I write, but I don't make a living as a writer.
At least not so far.
What's it?
You should write a book about it.
We'll see. I don't know.
It makes sense. Probably.
Maybe.
Yeah. And now you are able to do everything with your kids, to play with him, and
Yeah, a normal family.
Yeah.
As I guess as normal as we can be.
I mean, seeing you from without knowing that, you seem fit and.
Yeah, again, I'm very lucky. Most people with my numbers are in a bed in a hospital, but there's no explaining it. So.
Okay, a couple of last questions, then we're done. Okay, we have gone through this. Why did you decide to go public? What was the backlash? Yeah, in a way you have already replied to that, but what do you think about the war now and then? I mean, once at the beginning, did you think that the Iraqi war was a just one when you went there?
Yeah, I went through a few different phases. My initial response was yes, I supported it. I, like many people, believe that there were chemical weapons in Iraq. And then I moved to the other spectrum, which was to not support it. And thought of it as a horrendous error and a terrible mistake. I guess where I am now is I just think war is a cycle that comes and it goes, and it's I think waged by leadership that I think as soon as we become unfamiliar with what war is, that's when we're ready to wage another one. Someone had told me once that one of the interesting things about the first Gulf War was that it was waged by men who had been lieutenants in Vietnam, guys like Colin Powell and Schwarzkopf. And so when they wanted to invade, they did so with overwhelming force. 750,000 troops. The army was in want of nothing. It was, if we're going to go to war, it's going to be ugly, but we're going to overpower anybody out there. By the time we went to a war in Iraq and Afghanistan in 02, 03, 04, the leadership not only had not been to Vietnam, but many of them had been part of the first Gulf War, where war seemed, quite frankly, pretty easy and pretty clean and pretty quick. And so that was, I think, the belief that that's how we could pull it off again. Now I think you've got another generation of young leaders who, when it comes time for the next war, are going to be a little bit more like Vietnam and recognize that while if we have to do it, we will, but there's going to be a heavy price to pay, and it's not going to be anywhere near as easy as anybody thinks.
Yeah, I don't remember the name of the general who said that regarding the Iraq war.
Shalikashvili.
Shalikashvili, yeah. He was very critical about that.
He had cut his teeth in Vietnam. Yeah. He was an armor guy, and he knew.
Yeah, he knew. Yeah. Okay. Do you think that the U.S. government has done enough to face its responsibilities vis-a-vis of what happened in Abu Ghraib or in other places? I mean, the fact that it chose to outsource the war to the contractors in a way, the cheap, as you said? I
think time will tell. I think that's one that's hard to answer yet. Like many people, I'd like it to be quick, but I'm no historian, but I did study history in college, and I have a sense of how history works, and it's slow. But it often gets things right over time, and I think that's something that my hope is that in time they'll figure that out, and there'll be more of a. You can hear stories now of the tiger cages in Vietnam. And Vietnam was 50 years ago now. It takes that long, and my hope, and I might be naive and I may be wrong, but my hope is that in time, some of the guys who were at places like Abu Ghraib or Guantanamo or any of the other dozens of detention facilities in Afghanistan and Iraq are going to tell stories, and I think then it'll be easier to have an accounting of what went on and how we fix that in the future.
Did you went public exactly for this? I mean, to set an example for others to do the same thing? Or?
I don't know that I was trying to set an example. It was a personal decision. It was I can't explain it, but it was something that it was a conviction. It was something I needed to do. Interestingly, I'm not sure that I would necessarily encourage everyone to do that. It was hard and it was ugly, and there were some. I mean, I paid a price, not just in terms of the hate mail, but I paid a price in terms of my personal life, my marriage, my friendships. It was unpleasant. So I don't know that I would encourage guys to do it until they're ready. And I don't know how that it takes. It's a different time for everybody. So my hope is that it happens, but we'll see.